J.D. Vance was used to tough questions. As a politician, he had faced reporters, opponents, and critics, each trying to corner him with pointed remarks. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen in this small-town community hall in Ohio. The room was packed with locals, some supportive, others skeptical. The air carried a mix of anticipation and tension. Folding chairs creaked as people shifted, waiting for their turn at the microphone. The event was supposed to be routine, a town hall, a few polite questions, some handshakes, and a promise to look into concerns. But tonight was different. Tonight, someone was waiting. Someone who wasn't going to let J.D. Vance walk away with rehearsed answers. A man stood near the back, arms crossed over his chest. His name was Michael Foster, a lifelong Ohio resident and former steelworker. He had spent decades in the mills, working long hours to provide for his family. But now, like so many others, his job was gone. The factory had shut down, and the promises politicians made had turned into empty words. And tonight, he wasn't going to let another one of them get away with it. Vance, dressed in a crisp blazer and open-collar shirt, stood at the podium, nodding as the moderator pointed to the next person in line. A woman in a blue jacket asked about infrastructure funding. Vance gave a well-practiced answer, citing budget concerns and long-term planning. The audience murmured in response. Then, it was Michael's turn. He didn't move right away. Instead, he let the silence build, forcing Vance to look at him directly. When he finally stepped forward, his boots echoed against the wooden floor. He took the microphone, cleared his throat, and then, with a voice that carried years of frustration, he asked. "Mr. Vance, why should we believe a damn word you say?" The room went still. Heads turned. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, but Michael wasn't done. He tightened his grip on the microphone and continued. "I've seen men like you before. You show up, talk real nice, tell us you understand, and then you leave. And nothing changes. So tell me, right now, what makes you different?" Vance exhaled slowly, gripping the edges of the podium. He had faced hostility before, but this wasn't just anger, this was personal. And how he responded could change everything. The silence in the town hall was deafening. Michael Foster stood firm, his piercing gaze locked onto J.D. Vance, challenging him in a way few had dared. The audience leaned in, waiting. Some were hoping for a fight, others for a real answer. But no one was leaving. Not yet. Vance took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium like an anchor. He knew he couldn't dismiss Michael's frustration with political jargon. This was real. This was the kind of anger that had been brewing for years in towns like this, where factories had shut down, families had struggled, and promises had been broken too many times to count. "I hear you," Vance said finally, his voice measured but firm. "And I won't stand here and pretend that I have all the answers. But I do know this, change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen unless we fight for it." Michael let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Fight for it? You politicians say that every damn election. But what have you done? What have you really done for people like us?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a moment of reckoning. Vance adjusted his stance. "I grew up in a town like this," he said, his voice carrying weight. "I know what it's like to see businesses close, to watch good people struggle, to wonder if you'll ever get ahead. And I know that government alone won't save us. But what I can do, what I am doing, is fighting to bring back jobs, to invest in local businesses, to make sure people like you aren't forgotten." Michael's jaw tightened. He wasn't convinced. "And what if you fail?" he shot back. "What if this is just another speech?" Vance met his gaze, unwavering. "Then hold me accountable." The words hung in the air. The tension was thick. For a moment, it seemed like Michael might walk away, dismissing Vance like every other politician before him. But something in Vance's voice made him pause. The room was no longer just watching a politician answer a tough question. They were witnessing something bigger, a confrontation between two men who had lived through the same struggles but stood on opposite sides of power. And what happened next would determine whether this was just another campaign stop, or the moment everything changed. A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. The weight of J.D. Vance's words still lingered in the air, but Michael Foster wasn't ready to let it go. His fingers tightened around the microphone, his knuckles widening as if he was holding on to more than just the metal stand. He was holding on to years of frustration, broken promises, and a lifetime of hard work that had amounted to nothing. You want us to hold you accountable? Michael's voice was steady, but there was a slight tremor beneath it. You want us to believe that you actually care? He took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Vance. Then tell me right now, what have you done today to help people like us? Not promises, not speeches. Actions. The room was silent. No one shuffled in their chairs, no one whispered among themselves. They were waiting for an answer. A real answer. Vance inhaled through his nose, steadying himself. He knew this moment would define everything. He had spent his career talking about helping people, but now he had to prove it. I met with a group of business owners this morning, Vance started, his voice calm but firm. We're working on a program that offers direct funding to local businesses, giving them the resources to expand and hire workers here, not overseas. Michael let out a humorless chuckle. Great. More handouts for the rich. What about the rest of us? The ones who already lost everything? I also spoke with a veterans assistance group, Vance continued. We're pushing for more mental health resources and job placement programs for veterans who are struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. Michael narrowed his eyes. And what about us? The factory workers, the steel workers, the men and women who built this country. What are we supposed to do? Vance's grip tightened on the podium. That's exactly why I'm here, he said. To listen. To understand what you need. Michael shook his head. You don't need to listen. You already know. We need jobs. We need healthcare. We need security. We don't need another politician standing here telling us they'll fight for us. We need someone who actually will. Vance didn't look away. Then help me do it, he said simply. Michael blinked, caught off guard. What? Help me, Vance repeated. You want me to be accountable? Fine. Work with me. Tell me exactly what policies will make a difference. Tell me what needs to change. I'm not here to make empty promises. I'm here to build something real. And I can't do it alone. The air was thick with tension. The challenge was unexpected. The crowd, once still, began to shift. Some nodded, others watched with skeptical eyes. Michael swallowed hard. He had spent years fighting, shouting, demanding change. But now, standing face to face with a man who had the power to actually make it happen, he hesitated. Could he trust him? Could he afford not to? And then, the moment that no one expected happened, Michael slowly extended his hand. Michael Foster's hand hovered in the space between them, a silent challenge hanging in the air. J.D. Vance saw it, not just the handshake but the deeper meaning behind it. This wasn't just a simple gesture. It was a test. A moment where words would no longer be enough. The crowd held its breath. Some whispered among themselves, unsure of what would happen next. Cameras from local news stations zoomed in, capturing every detail of the moment. If Vance accepted, it could mean the start of something real. If he hesitated, if he faltered even slightly, the trust he was trying to build would crumble before it even had a chance to form. Vance didn't hesitate. He reached out and clasped Michael's hand firmly. The handshake was strong, steady. It wasn't just for show, it was a promise. A silent agreement between two men who had walked different paths but found themselves standing at the same crossroads. The room erupted into mixed reactions. Some clapped, some murmured skeptically, while others folded their arms, waiting to see what would happen next. Michael, still gripping the microphone in his other hand, didn't let go right away. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Vance could hear. "Don't waste this," he said, his tone carrying the weight of every worker who had been left behind. Vance nodded, his expression unreadable. "I won't." Michael finally pulled his hand back, stepping away from the microphone. But before he could return to his seat, a woman near the front row stood up. Her name was Linda Carmichael, a retired teacher who had spent her life watching the town she loved slowly fall apart. "I have a question too," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You talk about accountability, Mr. Vance. But tell me, how do we trust you won't disappear after tonight?" A few people in the audience nodded. It was a fair question. Politicians had come through this town before, made their promises, shaken a few hands, and then left, never to be seen again. Vance adjusted his stance. "I won't disappear," he said. "In fact, I'll be back next month. Same time, same place. And I'll bring answers to the questions you have today." A skeptical murmur ran through the crowd. Michael crossed his arms, watching closely. Linda tilted her head. "And if you don't?" Vance took a deep breath. "Then I don't deserve your trust." The room fell silent again. It wasn't the answer people expected, but it was one they respected. He wasn't asking them to believe in him blindly. He was giving them the power to hold him to his word. A slow clap started from the back of the room. Then another. And another. Soon, half the crowd was clapping. The other half watched, waiting to see if Vance would truly follow through. Michael turned toward the exit, shaking his head slightly. He wasn't convinced. Not yet. But as he reached the door, he glanced back at Vance, something unreadable in his expression. "You have a month," he said. "Don't make me regret this." And with that, he was gone. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the tension still lingered in the air. J.D. Vance stepped away from the podium, exhaling deeply. The night had gone differently than expected. He had come here prepared for questions, but not for the weight of an entire town's frustration pressing down on him. A few reporters hovered nearby, their cameras still rolling, waiting for a post-event statement. But Vance wasn't ready to give them one, not yet. He needed time to process what had just happened. "Mr. Vance," a voice called out. He turned to see Linda Carmichael standing by the exit. The retired teacher still held the same skeptical expression she had worn earlier. "Don't think we'll forget about your promise. 1 month. We'll be here." Vance nodded. "I wouldn't expect anything less." She studied him for a moment before giving a small, approving nod and walking out. The weight of accountability had settled squarely on his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, Vance's schedule was relentless. Every day was filled with back-to-back meetings, economic advisors, local business owners, labor unions, even former factory workers. He knew he couldn't return to that town hall with empty words. He needed solutions, real ones. One morning, as he sat in his office reviewing proposals for job creation initiatives, his assistant, Mark, entered the room with an urgent expression. "You're going to want to see this." Mark placed a laptop on the desk and played a video that had surfaced online. It was a clip from the town hall meeting. Specifically, the moment where Michael Foster had confronted him. But this wasn't just any clip, someone had edited it, cutting out key parts of the conversation, making it look like Vance had stumbled over his words, hesitated under pressure. The title read, "J.D. Vance Exposed, Can't Handle Real Questions." Vance leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "How bad is it?" Mark hesitated. "It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. The video's already hit over 1 million views. Vance exhaled sharply. He had expected pushback, but not this level of viral distortion. "What's our response?" he asked. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "The press team is working on a statement, but we've also been contacted by Michael Foster." Vance's brows lifted. "Michael?" Mark nodded. "He wants to meet. Says he has something important to tell you." Vance wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. If anything, the real fight was just beginning. J.D. Vance sat in the back of his car, staring out at the city skyline as the vehicle rolled toward the meeting place. Michael Foster had chosen a small, no-frills diner on the outskirts of town, a place where factory workers and truck drivers still gathered, despite the economic downturn. As Vance stepped inside, the scent of coffee and fried bacon filled the air. Michael was already there, seated in a booth by the window. He didn't stand when Vance approached, only nodded toward the empty seat across from him. "Didn't think you'd actually show," Michael muttered, stirring his coffee. Vance slid into the booth. "I gave you my word." Michael studied him for a long moment before sliding a phone across the table. "Watch that." Vance picked up the phone and pressed play. It was another video, one he hadn't seen yet. This one wasn't just a smear campaign. It was a full-blown attack. A supposed whistleblower claimed Vance had no real plans to help working-class Americans, that his promises were nothing more than a political ploy. The video was already gaining traction online. Vance exhaled sharply. "Where did this come from?" Michael leaned forward. "That's why I called you here. I don't like you, Vance. I don't trust you. But I hate being lied to even more. Someone is using me, using this town, to take you down." Vance's jaw tightened. "Do you have proof?" Michael nodded and pulled a manila folder from his jacket. "Names, emails, even payment receipts. Someone's funding this smear campaign, and it ain't coming from inside this town." Vance flipped through the documents. The deeper he read, the clearer it became: this wasn't just an angry citizen lashing out. This was orchestrated. Deliberate. Someone powerful didn't want him gaining traction here. Michael crossed his arms. "So tell me, Vance. You still gonna show up next month, or are you gonna run now that the heat's on?" Vance met his gaze, determination hardening in his eyes. "I don't run." Michael smirked. "Good. Because whoever's behind this, they're not done." The weight of Michael's words hung in the air. J.D. Vance sat back, flipping through the pages of the manila folder. The evidence was undeniable: someone was orchestrating a targeted attack, using the town's frustration as fuel for a larger political game. Vance placed the folder down and looked Michael straight in the eye. "If we go after this, it's going to get ugly. You ready for that?" Michael exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't come here to pick a fight. I came here because I don't like being played. Whoever's pulling the strings, they don't care about me or this town. And I'm done letting people like that call the shots." Vance nodded. "Then we fight back." The next morning, Vance's team got to work. They combed through the documents, cross-checking every detail. The trail led to a well-funded organization with deep political ties, one that had been known to push false narratives to discredit public figures. But Vance wasn't just another politician; they had underestimated his willingness to fight. Instead of issuing a defensive statement, Vance did something unexpected: he called a press conference. Standing on the same stage where he had faced Michael just weeks before, he held up the folder for the cameras to see. "I came to this town to listen," he began, his voice strong. "What I didn't expect was to find out that people here were being used, turned into pawns in a political game. Well, that stops now." The audience, once divided, leaned in. Even Michael, standing at the back of the room, crossed his arms and listened. I've been accused of making empty promises. So here's my first real one: I will not let this town be manipulated any longer. The people here deserve real solutions, not propaganda. And if anyone, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, thinks they can buy your anger and use it for their own gain, they're in for a fight. A slow ripple of applause began, growing louder. The tide was shifting. Vance wasn't just talking about policies anymore, he was standing up for the town itself. Michael stepped forward, hesitating for only a moment before taking the microphone. I don't agree with everything you say, he admitted, glancing at Vance. But for the first time in a long time, I see a politician who's actually willing to stand with us. And that means something. The crowd erupted. The divide that had seemed impossible to bridge was closing, if only a little. For the first time in years, the town wasn't just waiting for change, it was demanding it. As Vance stepped down from the stage, Michael extended his hand once more. This time, there was no hesitation. Vance shook it firmly, sealing the moment. The cameras flashed, capturing an image that would define the movement. A politician and a working-class man, once at odds, now united in purpose. It wasn't the end of the fight. But it was a start.